Apocalisse, or John's Guide to the Armageddon, is an upcoming setting and adventure supplement from Acheron, the Italian team that has previously made games based on classic literature such as Inferno and on historical touchstones such as Brancalonia. Apocalisse is based on the last book of the New Testament and of the Christian Bible, the Book of Revelation, and said to have been written by the Jewish Christian prophet John. There is very little consensus on who John actually was, but the Book of Revelation itself is one of the most popular books in the Bible because it's so full of truly exotic and apocalyptic imagery. Apocalisse puts you in the shoes of a human survivor who is alive after the 7 seals have been broken. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse have done their thing, and there is a final war between heaven, hell, and the people in between brewing in a destroyed post-apocalyptic Earth. This setting uses the D&D 5e rule set, and I think the obvious reason for it is that it's the most accessible rule set for the biggest number of people, but also because this is a setting where you fight angels, demons, and beasts. That's the whole point, so 5e is a pretty logical fit for them. A few things to note about this video before we jump in. First, the developers did sponsor this video, but they did not have any influence on what I was going to say. As always, I'll give you my honest thoughts at the end of the video. Second, I did a written interview with the creative director and lead game designer, Mauro Longo, which I published in my newsletter and which is linked below. In that interview, we had a very interesting discussion on the creation of this game, as well as how Italians do RPGs, among other things. You should definitely check out that interview if you want to see some surprising insights. Third, I'm only covering the 62-page quick start guide that was provided to me, not the full-length book that will be funding on Kickstarter at the time of this recording. I've left a link below to where you can pledge your support for the project. So let's unpack this thing. I think the very first thing worth mentioning here is the artwork. Acheron partnered with fellow Italian game studio Two Little Mice for a lot of the artwork. Two Little Mice made the award-winning game Broken Compass, a game that I reviewed on this channel, as well as an upcoming game called Household, which I very much plan to cover as well. You'll see as we flip through this quick start just how striking and biblical the illustrations are. It's pretty phenomenal. As far as the setting, so again, it's based on the Book of Revelation, which is found at the end of the New Testament of the Bible. I've left a link down below to one of the many places where you can read the full text of Revelation, but needless to say, it's probably the most insane and intriguing book of the Bible. It describes the end of the earth as we know it, and it's been the subject of many classical paintings, including the most famous fresco in the Western world by Michelangelo on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in Vatican City. You'll also see echoes of medieval Revelations artwork in these chapter header pages, where the main theme is angels, demons, and a bunch of dead humans. I wouldn't say that it's vital to read the Book of Revelation in order to enjoy this setting, but it might really enhance your experience. If you can't be bothered, here is a brief synopsis of the most important events that the prophet John, whoever he or they were, describes in the book. As the story goes, the Lord said the time was up for everyone on earth, and they were either to be called up to heaven or to be left behind on earth to either instantly die or live out their days in a hellish war zone. To get that party started down on earth, 7 heavenly seals were broken open, unleashing different things. The first broken seal released a horseman known as Conquest. He's the one with the crown and the bow. Think of him and all these horsemen as sort of demigods with a hyper-focus on a single theme, or maybe more like forces of human nature embodied in a figure on a horse. When Conquest was unleashed, he conquered lands. It's not clear in the actual Book of Revelation or in this quick start what that means exactly, but in my interview with creative director Mauro Longo, it's understood that these periods during, in between, and after the seals were broken were not measured in days or weeks, but years and maybe even decades. So with that in mind, first came Conquest, which could represent an era on Earth that lasted a generation or more. Then the second seal was opened, and a red horseman with a sword named War came popping out. After some undisclosed amount of time, the third seal was opened, and out came Famine on his black horse, spreading scarcity and hunger across the planet. Opening the fourth seal produced the horseman named Death, who was the metallest of them all. That was it for horsemen. Opening the fifth seal produced the souls of the saints and martyrs of heaven. The sixth seal sort of snuffed out the sun and moon, shuffled the mountains and continents around, and destroyed just about every city on Earth. And finally, the seventh seal released angels from heaven and Abaddon, the destroyer, who in turn opened up a giant shaft in the ocean and unleashed the so-called beast and their legion of demons. This is also right around the time when a third of water became blood, a third became something called wormwood, and a third just endless stone desert. It's now been 20 years since that very last seal was broken, and this is where your character comes in. You were either alive when all those seals were broken, or you were born into this hellscape, but you're known as a last one. The four horsemen are still around, but they've scattered to their own four corners of the map to pursue their motives by themselves. One of the things I'm intrigued by is the simplicity of the factions in this setting. There are only three: the throne, which represents the Christian god, his top field commander angel Metatron, and all the angels and holy warriors, and then there's the Abyss, which is the center point of the beast, aka Satanus, a seven-headed dragon who commands a dark legion of corrupted. And third, there's Babylonia, an urban bastion of last ones that fights strictly on the side of humans and human interests and survival. In the game, characters on the side of the throne or the Abyss bear a mark on their bodies, indicating which side they're on. The throne's halo is always on the forehead, and the sigil of the beast is usually on the left hand or arm. Right here is the only taste of some of the new mechanics in the setting that we get in the quick start, and they're associated with these marks. If your character starts with or acquires one of these marks, they get a number of mark dice equal to their proficiency bonus. Whenever they fail a roll, they can use a reaction to roll a mark die to add to the roll. If that roll is the max on the die, they get to roll again and keep adding the results to their original roll. Basically, it's an exploding die. But if that mark die comes up a 1 on the first try, then they have to roll on the fatal punishment table. The die itself starts as a d4, but upgrades to a d6 at level 3, a d8 at level 6, a d10 at level 10, and a d12 at level 15, which, if you think about it, adds a tremendous amount of fudge to your skill checks, especially if you consider that these dice explode. I guess the idea is that bearing a mark and actually choosing a side in this holy war confers some serious powers. There is even more you can do with your mark dice. The usage described here says that you can roll the die to take away from another nearby creature's roll, turning their successful attempt potentially into a failure. And the authors promise a number of additional uses for mark dice, which could be pretty interesting. So again, you play as a so-called last one. This is a very interesting note up here. It says basically last ones are humans. You can play as any of the races in 5e, but don't. Personally, I like this approach, and they do give you some options through your character's origin, where your character can be things like Heaven Risen or Purgatory Risen. Those particular options are actually not detailed in the quick start, however. As far as your last one's basic stats, they don't have an alignment, but rather a virtue and a sin, wherein if you roleplay out those aspects of your character, you can earn an inspiration point. As far as new archetypes, I'm not sure how many there will be in the full game, but this quick start details 4. The first is the Furioso, a fighter archetype that is described here only in terms of flavor and not mechanics. The Furioso, or Furiosa, are flamboyantly and elaborately dressed sellswords who mostly remain loyal to Babylonia. Notice the distinctly Italian flourishes in this illustration, it's great. Next there is the Sorcerer of Otherworldly Bloodline, a sorceress origin. They either have ancient angelic blood in their veins that comports features like bright eyes, sparkling skin, and luminous hair, or they have ancient demonic blood that manifests in glassy eyes, a dull complexion, and intimidating features. Either way, they are often discriminated against for being a little bit beyond human, and obviously they derive their magic from their otherworldly heritage. The Bard of Revelation is a bard college that is said to have been founded by the Prophet John himself. In the setting, some people are born with the so-called gift of revelation, where they can catch glimpses of the future. When they receive a vision, their eyes fill with blood. Under the tradition of John's College of Revelation, they use that blood to write in a huge book of prophecies that they always carry with them. And finally, the Wormwood Spectre, a rogue archetype. These are assassins and spies who use the smoke of burning wormwood to hide their presence. They gained their powers from either drinking or studying the water that had become tainted after the 7th seal was broken, and usually work either for the throne or the abyss. One of the best things about this game is probably going to be its section on monsters and other creatures, but you're not going to see any of that in this quick start, unfortunately. Well, you do get a couple, including this one illustration of a corpulent, undead Roman gladiator, but it's really just a tease. They describe a number of tantalizing monster concepts, but we don't get really any illustrations or stats or anything. There will be demons, archdemons, creatures called locusts, which are actually winged horses covered with iron plates and with tails of scorpions and humanoid heads bearing manes and golden crowns, goat demons, cherubim and seraphim, and tetramorphs, non-humanoid angels with the heads of 4 different creatures and 6 large wings, mighty ones, giants with all kinds of different appearances, and animals of the earth which have all mutated. These creatures, I think, are at the heart of this setting because their description in the actual biblical book of Revelation is one of the most fascinating aspects of that book of the Bible. So I'll be very interested to see how well they execute the bestiary here. The quick start ends with a sample one-shot adventure that gives you a feel for the setting. I won't spoil it here in this video, but the setup is basically that your characters have been sent by a council of elders in Babylonia to venture into the territory of war, as in the Horseman War, and retrieve an artifact that gives its user the power of war himself. You encounter calamities, miracles, and freaky biblical creatures that try to kill you. As far as the landscape, it's pretty bleak all around, which is something you'll just have to get used to in this setting. Alright, here are my thoughts on Apocalisse so far. I have some big questions. What is the full extent of the mark dice mechanics? They're described as being a pretty potent meta pool for players to fudge their rolls and their enemies' rolls, but I'm just wondering what else they'll do. I just want to get my arms around the gameplay implications that the mark dice will have. What are the incentives to play as a Babylonian who presumably doesn't have mark dice? If your character doesn't have a mark, then they don't have the dice. I'm just wondering how the setting sweetens the pot for players who want their characters to fight for Babylonia. What other unique mechanics are on offer? The 4 sample character origins are very flavorful and the illustrations are incredible, but what kind of traits and abilities will they and the rest of the origins come with? This is a particularly salient question because they're using the 5e rule set, which has a play cycle centered around players exercising various and interesting character abilities, especially in combat. Will the monsters have interesting abilities for tactical combat? Again, this is a 5e game, so combat is front and center. The hope is that these biblical creatures will do some crazy and interesting stuff. And here's what I'm excited about just by reading through the quick start. Intriguing setting that I almost can't believe hasn't been done before. Maybe it has been done before, but probably not like this. I'm excited to go back and reread Revelation and pore through all the bizarre details of the source material because I know the creators of this game already did that, and they plan on squeezing every last drop of it to distill it into this setting. Stunning presentation. Two Little Mice and the art direction at Acheron are making a tome here that I think will be valuable not just to gamers who want to actually use the setting, but for Christians and students of the Bible who want to see John's apocalyptic vision come to life. Actually, I can't speak for Christians here. Maybe some of them won't like the prospect of being able to play as a servant of Satan. But look, the art's going to be cool, so elegant simplicity in having just 3 factions. This is just the quick start, so I'm not sure if they're going to add more factions, but I like having just 3 factions. It simplifies the political landscape and sort of tightens the focus of the whole setting. There are still plenty of ways to inject intrigue and drama with only 3 factions, and obviously, players and GMs can always invent more factions and sub-factions as desired. So there you have it. The quick start for Apocalisse looks extremely promising. I have my looming questions, but I'll be following and backing the project to see what gets answered. I've left a link below to where you can back the project on Kickstarter, as well as where you can read my interview with creative director Mauro Longo. We had a really interesting conversation. Anyway, thanks for watching. See ya.